Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we are in Shemot. We are continuing in the book of Exodus this morning. We are at the momentous moment where they leave Egypt, they leave Mitzrayim. And we're going to take a look at that scene this morning because it feels very apropos of some of our experiences right now. Remember, they don't leave comfortably. Like they don't leave like, with the Uber Deluxe coming to pick them up, with all of their stuff and, like Jim, drive them luxuriously. With spa music in the car playing and filtered water, right, as they, travel. These are now refugees. They are refugees. They are leaving with only what they have on them, and they plunder, of course, the Egyptians as they leave. But they are refugees. They are running for their lives. So it feels like, I don't know, this moment felt mythically pretty apropos of where some of us are right now. Let's look at our text. We're going to start at chapter 14 of the book of Exodus. Vayidaber Adonai Moshe lemor. God speaks to Moshe saying, Daber b'nei Israel, vayeshuvu, vayachanu lifnei piachirot. So speak to the people Israel that they may turn back and encamp before piachirot, between Migdal and the sea, before Baal Tzifon, opposite it, you are to encamp by the sea. Ve'amar paro lifnei Israel. Now Pharaoh will say about the people Israel, they are confused in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. And I will make Pharaoh's heart, according to this translation, strong-willed, so that he pursues them. And I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, so that the Egyptians may know that I am Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, Vaya'asu Chen. And they did so. The king of Egypt was told that the people fled, and Pharaoh's heart and that of his servants changed regarding the people. Because remember, they threw them out. They said, what now have we done that we have sent Israel free from serving us? He had his chariot harnessed, while his fighting people he took with him. And he took 600 selected chariots and every kind of chariot of Egypt, teams of 3 upon them all. And Yahweh made the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, strong-willed, so that he pursued the people Israel while the people of Israel were going out biyad ramah, with a high hand. V'yirdefu Mitzrayim achareihem, and Egypt pursued them and overtook them and camped by the sea. All of Pharaoh's chariot horses, his riders, and his army by Piachirot before Baal Tzifon. As Pharaoh drew near, the people Israel lifted up their eyes. Now, here, Egypt marching after them. They were exceedingly afraid. Vayitz'aku v'nei Yisrael el Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, and the people cried out to Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. They said to Moshe, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us to die in the wilderness? What now have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve Egypt? Indeed, better for us serving Egypt than our dying in the wilderness. Moshe said to the people, Al tira'u, don't be afraid. Hityatzvu, stand fast. Or and see at Yeshuat Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, the deliverance of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, which God will work for you today. For as you see Egypt today, you will never see it again for the ages. Yod-Heh Vav-Heh will do battle for you. Y'all, shut up. Tachrishun, shut up. So, Vayomer, and God says to Moshe, Ma titzak elai, why do you cry out to me? Talk to the people Israel, Vayisatbu, and let them move forward. And you, hold your staff high, stretch out your hand over the sea, and split it, so that the children of Israel may come through the midst of the sea on dry land. While I will make Egypt's heart strong-willed, so that they come in after them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots and his riders. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, when I am glorified through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his riders. The messenger of God that was going before the camp of Israel moved on and went behind them. The column of cloud moved ahead of them and stood behind them, and came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. Here were the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night. This one did not come near this one all night. Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh caused the sea to go back with a fierce east wind all night, and made the sea into firm ground. Thus the waters split. The people of Israel came through the midst of the sea upon the dry land, the waters a wall for them on their right and their left. But the Egyptians pursued and came in after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his riders, into the midst of the sea. Now it was at daybreak watch that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh looked out against the camp of Egypt in the column of fire and cloud, and panicked the camp of Egypt, loosened the wheels of his chariots, and made them to drive with heaviness. Egypt said, I must flee before Israel, for Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh does battle for them against Egypt. Then Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moshe, stretch out your hand over the sea, and the water shall return upon Egypt, upon its chariots and its riders. Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned at the face of daybreak to its original place, as the Egyptians were fleeing toward it. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh shook the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned. They covered the chariots and the riders of all of Pharaoh's army that had come after them into the sea. Not even one of them remained. But the people of Israel had gone upon dry land through the midst of the sea, the waters a wall for them on their right and their left. So Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh delivered Israel on that day from the hand of Egypt. Israel saw Egypt dead by the shore of the sea, and Israel saw the great hand that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had wrought against Egypt. The people held Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in awe, and they trusted in Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and in Moshe, God's servant, which we know won't last very long. All right, so we've talked lots and lots about these kinds of scenes where we have reality being suspended, that the writing is such that it doesn't feel exactly straightforward. Things move back and forth. It's disjointed. There's not one of them left, but then they're laying on the shore of the sea. So it's very disjointed. This is not, again, we'll say it again. It's not because they didn't know how to edit texts. It's because this is not a normal recounting of a normal event. And so one of the ways literarily they, in the ancient world, would describe that is by having the description be kind of tangled and outside of ordinary language and outside of normal, here's what happens, and it follows this kind of logical course that you can just picture in your head. It's harder, any of these scenes that are supposed to not be a normal event, they're harder to picture in your head because of the way it's written. And that's because it should be hard for us to imagine because it is so surreal, so not the norm. So that's about the style. But when we look at the actual way that this story is crafted to commentary on this, George's favorite part is the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, because George just loves that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh wants to be glorified through coming after Pharaoh and Pharaoh's army. But for me, like where I find myself and where a lot of the commentators understand us often to be as human beings is this moment here where Pharaoh's drawing near and the people Israel lift their eyes, right? We see this a lot in the text. They lift their eyes, Vehine, and yo, lo, Mitzrayim nosea acharehem. Egypt is coming after them. And they were exceedingly afraid. And they cry out to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. But that's not all they do, is it? They cry out to God, but what do they do to Moshe? What do they say to Moshe? So they cry out to God, but then immediately turn on Moshe and say to Moshe, what? Was it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you took us out to die in the wilderness? So this sarcasm-laden critique of Moshe, right? So they panic, they cry out to God, and then they turn on a human leader and immediately seek to blame and find whose fault this is that we're in this situation. Then they say, isn't this exactly what we said to you in Egypt? That it was better that we serve Egypt than die in the wilderness? Now, of course, those of you who we've learned this text before, we know we don't have this scene in Torah. We do not have a scene where the people say to Moshe, better we should stay in Egypt, leave us alone. We don't have that text. So either it never happened and they're saying, we told you so when they didn't, or it's a scene we don't have that was part of the tradition that's been lost. But in any case, we don't have that part. We don't have that scene. They turn to Moshe and say, we told you so, that this was going to happen, and it was better that we should serve Egypt. But Moshe doesn't buy it. Moshe doesn't bite, right? He doesn't argue with them. He doesn't counter them. Moshe says to them, don't be afraid. Moshe knows that all of this garbage coming out of their mouth, all of it is because they are panicking and they are freaking out. And because they're freaking out, they're going to blame him, and they are going to look for anything they can to seize on and make it somebody's fault and start pointing fingers. He knows this. He says, Al tira'u, don't be afraid. It's okay. Stand firm. Stand still. This is that word from Aten Nisavim Kulchem Hayom that we read on Yom Kippur, right? All y'all stand here today. This is like a matzeva. This is, that word that's about being like a pillar. So stand still. Or and look, see the deliverance of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that God will do for you, because the way that you see Egypt, Hayom, now, you won't see them like that ever again, because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh will fight for you. Y'all just need to shut up.
Sounds like a politician.
Right. And so now, this is Moshe talking to the people. The next line we get is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh speaks to Moshe. So we have the people crying out to God. God doesn't answer the people. Moshe answers the people. But then God talks to Moshe, not to the people. And what does God say to Moshe? Why are you crying out to me? Talk to the people of Israel and tell them to move forward. We don't have Moshe crying out to God. We have the people crying out to God. So there's lots written here about the order of things here. Who's addressing whom? Why are people addressing people that didn't talk to them? What is happening here? So there's lots written. We're going to look at some modern commentary on it because it feels so appropriate to this moment for those of us who are stuck and panicking and are refugees and are looking to blame and are pretty pissed off and disoriented and panicked. So God says to Moshe, why do you cry out to me? We don't have Moshe crying out to God. So for the rabbis, God knows Moshe is actually crying out. That inside, Moshe's screaming. Moshe comes off looking like he's calm and telling the people to be calm, but that inside Moshe's freaking out. And that's what God responds to. God knows that Moses really is freaking out. And so says, don't cry out to me. It's not going to help you to, cry out to me. Why? Why not? The people cry out to God. So why? God doesn't criticize the people, but God says to Moshe, don't cry out to me. Speak to the people of Israel and tell them, Vayisa'u, to go, to move forward. Some commentary says God is being very clear here. Don't yell at me to Moshe, right? Because this is the same word, yell, cry out, scream, whatever. Don't yell at me. Talk to the people. Don't yell at the people. Don't order them. Don't boss them around. Don't capitulate. Don't pamper them. Speak to them. You are their leader. Talk to them. Tell them to move forward. And you take your staff and lift it over the sea and split it so that they can come through the midst of the sea on dry land. Betoch hayam, in the sea, bayabasha, on dry land. So the rabbis want to ask, are they betoch hayam? Are they in the midst of the sea? Or are they on yabasha? Or are they on dry land? It can't be both. And they say this was the miracle, that it actually was both. And there's many commentaries that want to talk about this moment being one where several of them are looking down. Ruvain and Shimon look down, and all they can do is kvetch about their sandals being stuck in the muck, in the ick of the wet yabasha. Like it's dry land, but it's in the midst of the sea, so it's really kind of slogging through muddy, icky, whatever. And that's all they see, and that's all they do is grumble about that. And in so doing, they miss the whole miracle. They just fetch the whole way across about ick, my sandals, gross, it's sucking at my feet, ew, this is disgusting, oh my God, like, ugh, get me out of here. And they miss the entire miracle, right? So this is an opportunity for the rabbis to talk to us about paying attention and about noticing. There's lots of midrash written about this moment of going through the sea with the water on both sides, where they come upon the midst of the sea, but upon dry land. The water's a wall for them on their right and their left. So they could see all the fish and everything like on their right and on their left. And even the lowest handmaid, says our rabbinic tradition, says the midrash, even the lowest handmaid saw God at this moment, experienced God as the one who splits the sea, and really has this intimate experience of seeing the divine acting on their behalf. Then, of course, we get the confusion of the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and we get this idea that they are driving Vayinhagehu, they are driving them, they're driving the chariots bichvedut, in heaviness. So this word heavy, this is also what happens to Pharaoh's heart. So we cannot miss that this is the same word. What happens to the chariot wheels in the mud is the same thing that happens to Pharaoh's heart. It gets stuck, essentially. And that is what brings them down. And of course, that's what brings down Pharaoh, that his heart gets stuck on winning, on keeping the people subservient, and changing his mind that they can leave. So here we have, they are delivered, and then they are, of course, in awe with all that they saw, trusting in God and in Moshe, his servant. Then, of course, we get the song at the sea is what comes next. So anything anybody wants to share or ask or reflect on before we look at our commentators?
I think it's interesting. You were talking about the word debek, and it's also used, we're supposed to, dabkenu b'mitzvotecha, we're supposed to, it's translated as cleave. We're supposed to, debek, we're supposed to cleave and glue ourselves, as it were, and get stuck in the mitzvot. Not in a negative way, but that's using it in a positive way.
Right. Lovely. Margot?
Yeah, I was going to say that the call out for the muddiness, imagine you're trying to push a heavy chariot forward and not having a lot of energy to do that because what you're doing behind is very stressful. I just felt that resonated a lot for maybe this week for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of us in the house. So
yeah, moving that thing forward in the muck, not easy. Every single quarter inch feels like, right, it takes all kinds of effort to move it at all, right?
And not having that in the first place, even because of your own, just stuckness that you're at. So, yeah.
Yeah. Bert?
Is this where the Midrash about Nachshon comes from? When Moses crying out to God, God says, don't cry out to me, you do it. Don't depend. Yeah. This is Nachshon's story.
Yeah, this is exactly where that comes in, that Moshe raises his hand and nothing happens. and because nobody moves, and that actually the waters can't part until the people move forward. That God is saying, God's not saying, don't cry out to me, tell them to move just because I want them to. What God is saying is, I can't do anything. Don't call out to me. I can't do anything until they move forward. They have to move. That's how this works. If they don't move forward, nothing opens. Nothing can happen. I've done my part. You've got your thing raised. We're doing everything we can. Now the people have to move forward. That's how this whole thing opens up. And that's just how it is. So God is explaining the instructions, not giving orders, is how the rabbis understand this beautiful. It's a beautiful midrash that God is saying, you can cry out to me all you want, but until you take the first step forward, nothing's going to happen. It can't. Right? Until we take that first step, there isn't the possibility opened up that becomes the path forward. And Melinda?
That's the midrash I was going to ask about. I love that telling of the story. It's very moving.
So there's the
Thank
one
you.
where Nachshon, goes in and he, and he keeps going higher and higher and higher. And it's not till the water goes up his nose that the waters part. It takes him going in all the way to where he would drown. And that is what affects the miracle of the waters parting. There's another midrash I love, which is all of the tribes, the head of the tribes, the men are all arguing about who should go first. And the women all link arms and just walk forward and push the men into the sea. And that is what opens up the way forward, because they just push them in. All right, Susan.
Oh, I guess I'm showing my age, but I remember when the Ten Commandments movie came out, our rabbi at ranting and raving when we were in religious school about how it set the whole interpretation back. That, to priest, just when it shows the water party, he was just ranting and raving.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's hard for us to watch those movies. We who know,
especially since Charlton Heston as Moses. Give me a break.
Yeah, and in the Prince of Egypt, they sing Micha Mocha before they go into the sea. I'm like, really? James Lieberfarb.
Yeah, I've sort of what my takeaway for this is, simply put, faith comes with action. No matter how daunting sometimes life circumstances can be, if I just dwell and complain, nothing's going to get done. But if I take action, I know from my own personal experience, that's how my spiritual faith gets cultivated.
Is through action.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Betsy.
This makes me think of what we're dealing with currently, where we can't move forward in terms of our rebuilding and debris removal until the community comes together and everybody decides. There's this whole controversy about opting in or opting out of FEMA and allowing the Army Corps of Engineers to do the debris removal. And a lot of the discussion has to do with, well, let's all join forces and say yes and opt in so that it will get done more quickly. And it's the same kind of thing where we can't move forward until everybody joins together and it's a community effort.
Susan Kennewick Klein, do you want to speak?
Yeah. God is saying, somebody needs to do something. Somebody needs to take action. It just reminds me of many other instances in the Torah when God responds to the people when they cry out. It's not when Moses asks for anything, but it's when the people get together and as Betsy said, togetherness, cry out to God.
Beautiful, right? We have to cry out. So I want to go there because I think action is 100% part of the message here. We have to be ready to act, and nothing can really open up until we take those steps. But there's stuff that happens before that that's really important. Torah does not waste words. Torah does not throw in verbs for no reason, right? This is written on clay tablets. Clay tablets are very heavy. So you want to use as few words as possible to get your point across when you're writing cuneiform in clay tablets. All right. So let's look at what some of the commentary has to say about these other words that we saw used. All right. So from Yael Shai, who of course is a mindfulness teacher, who says about this scene, these are classic responses to feeling stuck and afraid. When we truly don't know how to get out of the mess it looks like we're in, we begin to panic. And panic leads to anger, blame, sometimes of ourselves, sometimes others, and a desire to go backwards to Egypt, even if going backwards is not an option. When we cannot see a way out of a scary situation, our minds work on overdrive to try and find some control, blaming, panicking, doubting, and despairing. Moshe's telling the people that there's a way out of the room that they don't know about. He's telling them not to be afraid, to stop their panicked cries and to hold still and silent a little bit longer than is comfortable. Moshe then tells the Israelites that the way they see the Egyptians today will never be repeated. In so doing, he offers a new kind of perspective, a widening of vision and scope that is the direct antidote to fear and stuckness. As Aviva Zornberg writes, fear is born of a way of seeing. A changed way of seeing will change their feeling and thinking. I don't think it's accidental that Moshe's words come in the order they do. We must calm down, be still, and resist panic and despair if we're to find a way out of the room. She uses the analogy of an escape room. We must trust that our distorted, fearful views we see in times of pain and struggle are fleeting. We have to stay in the not knowing longer than is comfortable in order to allow our path to emerge. But to push forward into water up to your nose before the water moves out of your way to allow you to safely pass is a show of tremendous courage. One can almost viscerally feel the fear, desperation, faith, and the hope as they plunged forward into the water. Perhaps we've had similar times of stuckness in our lives where the only way out was to take that initial scary, faith-filled plunge into the unknown, into the hotel room, into the rented apartment. An additional powerful twist on the story that many commentators, including Rambam Sforno, affirm is that while the Israelites are moving into the water and through its corridors, they begin to sing. Not after they reach dry land, but while they walk. They use as proof the lyrics of the song the Israelites sing when Pharaoh's cavalry, chariots, and riders entered the sea. Then Moses and the Israelites sang. Why does the timing of the song matter? I think a liberation song sung from the middle of a terrifying place, from the dead center of a miracle nobody knows will end successfully, is a profoundly powerful song. Imagine it had the ache and the hush, the melody and the music of longing, praise, awe, and the deepest sense of transformation. So for her, these words of Hityatzvu, stand still, B'tachashun, and shh, be quiet, is about staying with being terrified longer than we want to. We want to act out of the panic. We want to blame. We want to find and believe me, I've gone there a lot. About lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. How could the reservoir be dry? And no one knew that? The people in charge of the reservoir did not know it was dry? 175 million gallons of water gone. And nobody knows that? Whose head should roll for that? I've lost everything because of that. Right? This is sometimes the most comfortable place to be when we're grieving and scared and lost and disoriented is, of course, whose fault is it? Because that feels way better and closer to some sense of control than this was a random act of 100 per mile winds with a spark catching on to something wood. Like that just feels way too random and catastrophic to deal with. So I think the deep wisdom of this text has always spoken to me. I've always loved this scene. It's one of my favorites. Rabbis are not supposed to have favorites, but we do. And so this remains one of my favorites. But this year it was like, wow, like it really, it landed really hard for me that, right, shut up, just shut up, stay present. It's not going to feel good. You're going to be scared. You're going to be sure that you're drowning, that it's all over, that you've lost everything, that you're ruined. Like it just, but okay. So that's what happens. That's what happens. But there's always guidance from the tradition that says, stand still longer than is comfortable, be quiet, hang on. And when it's time, take the first steps that you need to take when it's time. But first, they have to stand still. I love that about this teaching. First, they have to stand still. And I believe on some level, that's really important, that Moshe and God get it, that they need to stand still. They can't move right away. And they're going to have to do that over and over and over again, as are we. We stand still and get quiet, and then we take the next step. All right, Rabbi Rachel Goldenberg says, we can probably think of examples in our own lives, likely not as dramatic as this scene at the sea, but where we are feeling attacked, endangered, cornered, or overwhelmed, and we're tempted to run away or fight back. The Israelites are trapped. They have nowhere to go. The Egyptian army is gaining on them, and on the other side is the Sea of Reeds. Fear turns to anger, turns to blame. They are so overwhelmed that they're ready to head back to slavery. But Moshe's response is to tell them to stand still, hityatzvu, watch what's happening, or and get quiet, tachrishun. Classic mindfulness instructions. Meantime, the Israelites' challenge is to stand by and witness without fighting or running back to Egypt. When I allow myself to get still, I can feel a connection with my fellow citizens who support, in this case, she's talking about an executive order of deporting people. They are afraid, and I am afraid. We are afraid of different things for different reasons, but we are all afraid. So to Betsy's point, some people don't want to opt in. Some people want to opt out because they have a company that's going to do it. My HOA wants to opt out. So everybody's saying, well, if everybody would just get on the same page, we could figure this out. They're afraid, and I'm afraid of different things for different reasons, but we're all afraid. So here's my midrash for the week, she says. And maybe it's a bit of a fantasy, but please indulge me. I imagine that when Moses declared, have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will work for you today, there were factions among the Israelites who resisted standing still and who called on each other to either grab a weapon to fight or to hit the road and run back to Egypt. But in the Torah, we don't hear about anyone defecting or going into battle. Perhaps this is because Moses and some grassroots tribal leaders showed courageous leadership. Perhaps they were able, my copy paste did not work with this text, perhaps they were able to create a space for everyone to share their fears and their resistance and to listen to each other and to reassure each other and hold each other still in love. Imagine what that would be like in our country right now if there were leaders who could help us hold our peace. If there were leaders who could courageously gather governors and mayors, senators and representatives from all political parties, heads of refugee agencies, refugees and undocumented immigrants, border agents and law enforcement professionals, and a sampling of American-born citizens from across our country. Imagine if we all had a safe space physically or virtually to sit together and the time to find connection and compassion. Imagine sitting in small groups with ground rules that required us to speak from our own experience and to hang in and listen even when it got uncomfortable. One by one, each person would first share what gives them joy and then what is they're most afraid of right now. What might change? What if policy regarding refugees and immigration arose out of this place of connection, compassion, and courage? Perhaps some things would change. Perhaps some things would stay the same. We probably would not all be 100% happy with the outcomes and the compromises, but imagine the sense of release from battle. Imagine watching the enmity sinking to the bottom of the sea and feeling at long last that the redemption of each of us is bound up with the redemption of the other. So moving out of our local experience, what some of us are going through, looking at, which I can barely do, looking at the national news, looking at the circus that is going on in Washington right now. Thank God I'm too absorbed in my own mess to spend much time on it. I'm shocked actually by how much is being written in response to Trump's Gaza plan. I just can't even I don't understand why people are wasting air and breath and time on it. I really don't. It's the most ridiculous set of utterances in the world. But that sense of what I see when I do look up at all is exactly what I feel like she was talking about. What if we had leadership that said, okay, let's be still. Let's hear each other. Let's hear across some major fear, some blame, the panic, the anger, the disaffiliation. Let's hear across some of that, because there's no other way we're going to get any kind of solutions on the table. And I don't see any kind of real solutions being put on the table anytime soon, because of exactly what she was talking about how everything's going right now in Washington. George?
Indeed, this is a basic principle of mindfulness, is that you stop and you think and get information and you act, and the community is absolutely essential. I am now, as some of you know, in a retirement community in Encinitas, in, quote, independent living as opposed to assisted living. But everybody here says that this is their best alternative, that whatever happened, with me was the fires and this horrendous thing which we're all experiencing. The other people here have not had that as a bad experience, but they all say, I would rather have my other life back. But that what they do, and what I am trying to do to say to myself, is that this is the best alternative, and we should make the best of it, which is very difficult to do, as we all know, in experiencing the chaos that's occurring now.
We love you, George. All right. Rabbi Mark Margolius and Rabbi Pamela Wax say, once again, we call to mind a sage teaching of Yogi Berra of blessed memory. When you see a fork in the road, take it. This is a good week to pay special attention to the Nikudot Bechira, moments when we become more aware of options available to us. Like George said, here are the options. What's the best option right now? Going back to Egypt is not an option. Not an option. Even though they want to, not an option. It may be that the most effective clue are those moments when, like the Israelites, we feel trapped in our jobs, in our behavioral patterns, in our relationships. See if you notice moments this week when fear arises, because there is an inner narrative telling you that there's no solution or no way out. In those moments, pause for a breath, name that fear, and see what arises. And I forgot to put in the rest of her name. I will find it for you. As soon as the Israelites leave Egypt, even before crossing the Red Sea, two things happen. First, they cry out to Moses, insisting to return to Egypt. Second, Pharaoh tries once again to regain control over them, a move that will cause his ultimate downfall. If we understand these dynamics metaphorically rather than literally, they may illuminate for us familiar internal patterns. The Israelites' instinct to return to Egypt when facing the challenge of crossing the sea captures poignantly our own fear of the unknown and the subsequent desire we often have to retreat back to our comfort zones. Hello. Pharaoh's relentless pursuit of the Israelites symbolically expresses our own inner Pharaoh. Our egos are often distrustful and afraid. As a result, they often try to exert control over people, events, everything in our orbit. We each live with negative feelings and impulses, doubt, envy, fear, and the need to control. Whether we like it or not, these accompany us through life. But we also have other companions, such as love and trust, open-heartedness and faith. These feelings and attributes are often so subtle we may forget their presence. But mindfulness practice can help us remember and attend to them. And this is her practice for this week, her recommendation. Choose a prayer from the Jewish tradition that gives you strength and uplifts you. I'd like to suggest the prayer of Modeh Ani, the gratitude prayer Jews say each morning upon awakening. Modeh, Modah for a woman, Ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shechazarta bi nishmati bechemla, Rabba emunatecha. Grateful am I before you, nobility of life, alive and eternal, for you brought back my breath, my soul with compassion. Great is your faith. She translates it as great is your faith in me. Take a moment to feel the breath of life moving through you. Feel the compassion of it. Feel the compassion of a life breath given and given again, just like manna, without you having to do anything to receive it. Say these words a few times. Feel the faith of life source in you, just in that it keeps sustaining you alive, just like with manna day after day. Connect to the words and to the felt sensation of receiving and see how this impacts your day. So for me, like it's duh, newsflash from the Department of Duh. It's also one of the hardest things to do, right? Like I get it, like everybody knows, and that this is the way to go. And I still find myself, like George, wanting my old life back really badly. I really want to go home. I really want to go home. And I want to put on my clothes, and I want to put on my earrings, and I want to put on my shoes, and I want to sit on my couch and watch my TV and go into my pantry and get all the things I picked out that are in there and make something for me to eat that I want. And I want it now. And when it happens, it's really hard to say, okay, well, stay with gratitude, open to being what are we grateful for? Like, okay, but we also know it's the only way. It's the only way. We don't get to go back. The chariots are there. They're there with their swords. There's no way, we can't go back. It's a toxic waste dump. We can want to go back all we want to, but chariots ready to cut us down are there. So we can rage about that, or like Pamela, Dr. Nicolescu was saying, we could also just, go, wow, that is a really strong impulse to go back. And I'm really pissed off that I can't. And I can identify that and stay with that and maybe be compassionate with myself about that and maybe not get all judgy with myself. That's another hard one. and go, okay, you desire something that you really loved. That's okay. It's all right. And then to really just stay present to ourselves and identify that longing and that yearning and the anger and the sadness and the grief and the outrage that this could happen. And if you open the television, translating from Hebrew, if you turn on the television, it's happening everywhere, right? And I'm not trying to make it better. I'm saying they're both happening at the same time. The outrage that it happens at all, and the reality that with climate change and with war and with everything else, it's happening to so many people all the time. And so to acknowledge both the pain of that for ourselves, and hopefully eventually it moves us to a place of compassion for other people who are displaced and other people whose homes and villages are gone because of a hurricane or a typhoon or war. And, people are displaced. Whole villages are displaced so that people can take their land and mine for expensive metals that are in our cell phones. Every single one of us has some of that metal that people are displaced for. So it's a both and that I am really grateful our tradition understands. That it's not either or. We don't judge ourselves for that experience of panic and of overwhelm and of grief and of rage and of feeling like we're caught in the chaos. We don't judge it. We are a people that says that is natural, that is normal. Calm down, stay together, stay present, and we're going to take steps forward when we're ready together. And that means one of us sometimes is going to have to drag the other one along, right? And that's okay. That's what we do. We pull each other along, and that's how we get through it. And so whatever it is, and it isn't just this catastrophe, it's whatever's happening in our world and in our lives. And, whatever losses, whatever things that come with aging, things that come with changed circumstance, things that come with a new job, things that come with a new way of understanding things. So this Torah portion really, for me, was important this week about taking time to stay present, and then eventually to move, really eventually to get to Modeh Ani Lefanecha. I am grateful that I'm alive. I'm grateful that I'm here. I'm grateful I have all of you. I'm grateful I have this work, because I don't know what the heck I'd be doing. I'd be spinning out of control if I didn't have this job. I am grateful that I have this incredible home that I'm sitting in with gracious people who are allowing me to stay with the dog as long as I need. I mean, it's just, there's so many things to be grateful for. And so I'm not saying that's first. I'm not saying it doesn't come after a very long list of other things. But when we can finally get there, that is a place to rest as well. A sense of, okay, we have each other. We have our physical selves. And a lot of people are having challenges with that at the same time that they've lost everything. They're also dealing with hoping that their body can remain a safe home for them. We just visited 2 people in the hospital. We visited Eileen in the hospital, and visited Roger Diamond in the hospital. I know Lee's going in for surgery. So it's, there's a lot that we're going to hold each other through. And we are going to hold each other through this, as we always do.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.